The storm rolled over Chicago like a judgment. Lightning split the sky above the Meridian Financial Tower, 42 floors of glass and steel that the city's legitimate elite used as a monument to their ambition. What they didn't know, what nobody who mattered ever knew, was that the 42nd floor belonged to Luca Moretti, not on paper, not in any deed registered with Cook County. But in every way that counted in this city, that floor was his cathedral, his war room, his confessional. Tonight, it was hosting an execution. Dominic. Luca's voice was quiet. It was always quiet. Men who needed to shout hadn't yet learned that silence was the sharpest weapon. You took $40,000 from the shipment moving through Port 7. The man zip-tied to the chair, Dominic Favery, once a trusted soldier, now a pale, sweating ruin of himself, shook his head so hard his neck cracked. "Don, I swear on my mother." "Your mother," Luca said, turning from the floor-to-ceiling window that looked out over the city glittering wet in the rain, "has been receiving a monthly payment from my accounts for 6 years. I kept her in that house in Oak Park after your father died. I've been very patient with your family, Dominic." Marco Vitelli stood by the door, arms crossed, expression neutral. He'd seen this ritual enough times to know exactly how it ended. It always ended the same way when Luca used that particular tone, low, almost gentle, like a priest delivering last rites. "The money," Luca said, "I don't care about. It's the insult. You looked me in the eye last Tuesday and told me the count was clean. Don, you lied to my face." 3 words. And then Marco moved, and it was over quickly, efficiently, the way Luca demanded all things be done. No theater, no cruelty for its own sake. Just consequence. Luca was straightening his cufflinks, platinum, engraved with the Moretti crest, a serpent eating its own tail, when his phone buzzed. He checked it, a weather alert. The storm, already brutal, was being upgraded. Flash flood warnings, wind speeds that would ground helicopters and strip umbrellas inside out. "Clean this up," he told Marco. "I'll be in my office." The private office was at the end of the hall, a separate wing entirely, accessed by a keycard that only Luca possessed. His personal files were in there. His ledgers. The real ones. The photographs on the walls that told the true history of the Moretti family, not the sanitized version printed in the Tribune's society pages. His father's gun, his brother's death certificate. His everything was in that room. He swiped the keycard, pushed open the door, and stopped. There was a girl asleep in his chair, not metaphorically, not figuratively. An actual human girl, young, maybe early 20s, dark hair damp and curling against pale skin, a battered canvas backpack clutched to her chest like a shield, long legs tucked beneath her in his cognac leather chair, as if she'd sat down meaning to stay only a moment and sleep had ambushed her. A criminology textbook lay open on his desk. His desk. Beside it, her laptop, screen dark. Beside that, and here Luca felt something cold and precise move through him, a printed research file, with his name on it. Luca Moretti, The Architecture of Modern Organized Crime in Chicago. Graduate thesis research, Arya Calloway, University of Chicago. He stood perfectly still for 10 full seconds. He was a man who prided himself on emotional regulation. He'd sat across the table from senators, cartel representatives, federal negotiators, and felt precisely nothing. But standing in the doorway of his sanctum looking at a sleeping girl with his name in her hands, he felt the strangest sensation in his chest. Like a lock turning. Like something that had been sealed for a very long time clicking open without permission. He crossed the room silently, looked down at her. She was beautiful in the way that things are beautiful before they know anyone is watching. Completely unguarded, completely real. Dark lashes against sharp cheekbones. A small scar on her chin, faint and silver white. Her lips slightly parted. She smelled of rain and coffee, and something floral he couldn't name. He picked up her thesis file. Read the first page. She'd been researching him for 4 months. She had his public businesses cataloged, his known associates, his family history going back to his grandfather's arrival from Palermo in 1952. She was brilliant, frighteningly so, but she was working only from public records. She didn't know about the 42nd floor. She didn't know about Port 7, or the arrangement with the city alderman, or the 17 men currently employed specifically to keep her just this level of ignorant. She didn't know him. Lightning strobed through the windows, and in that flash of white light, her eyes opened. They were gray. Storm gray, like the sky outside, like everything tonight conspired to a single theme. She looked at him. He watched understanding arrive in stages, first confusion, then alarm, then the rapid calculation of a sharp mind taking inventory, strange man, private office, locked building, storm outside, no way out. She stood up fast, knocking his textbook to the floor, clutching her backpack. "I'm so sorry, the door was unlocked. I just needed to get out of the rain. I wasn't." Her voice was steadier than her hands. He appreciated that. "I'll leave right now. Sit down." "I really think." Arya. Her name from his mouth stopped her completely. He watched the blood drain from her face as she realized he'd read her file. That he knew her name. That he was not a random office worker she'd inconvenienced. He let that silence stretch just long enough. "Sit." "Down." She sat. Slowly, gripping her backpack straps until her knuckles whitened. Defiant even in obedience, she sat down, but her chin lifted, those gray eyes meeting his with something that wasn't quite bravery, but was the very convincing performance of it. "Good girl," he thought. "You're going to need that." "Your research is impressive," he said, setting the file down precisely. "Incomplete, but impressive." She said nothing. "Wise. You know my name," Luca said. "You've been studying me for months." He pulled the second chair from the corner, unhurried, controlled, and sat across from her, elbows on knees, close enough that she had to work to maintain that steady gaze. "Which means you know what I am. I know what the public record says you are." Her voice, low, careful, but with a current of sharpness beneath it that she couldn't quite suppress. He felt that strange sensation again, the lock turning. "And now you've seen what no one else has been allowed to see," he said, gesturing at the room, the files, the photographs on the walls she hadn't had time to examine, but had been positioned to see when she first woke. "My private office. My private records." He paused. "You understand the problem. You're going to kill me. Not a question." She said it the way someone says you're going to be late. Practically. Luca Moretti looked at this girl, this soaking wet, exhausted, terrifyingly clever girl who had fallen asleep in his chair studying him for her graduate thesis, and felt the last piece of something slide into place inside him. He smiled. It was not a reassuring smile. "Kill you?" He stood, buttoned his jacket, walked to the door, paused with his hand on the frame, and looked back at her over his shoulder. "Arya Calloway, I've been watching you for 3 months. I know where you live, what you eat for breakfast, who you trust, and exactly how much trouble you're capable of creating." His eyes met hers one final time. "You're not going anywhere." The storm screamed against the glass. She was already trapped. 48 hours ago, Arya's biggest problem had been a 14-page bibliography that wouldn't format correctly. She thought about this while being driven through rain-slicked Chicago streets in a car that cost more than her annual tuition, flanked by men who wore their silence like weapons. She thought about her apartment, cramped, beloved, smelling of her neighbor's cooking and her own stacked research papers. Her cat, Dostoevsky, who would be wondering where his 10 p.m. feeding was. Danny, who was probably blowing up her phone right now. She thought about all the ordinary, beautiful smallness of her life, and understood with crystalline clarity that she had stepped outside it, and the door had swung shut behind her. Luca Moretti's compound was 40 minutes outside the city, a property that didn't appear on any real estate database, hidden behind a private road and enough oak trees to swallow sound. The house itself was not what she expected. She'd built a mental image from her research, ostentatious, baroque, a monument to ego. What she found was something almost restrained, stone and dark wood, expansive but not excessive, lit from within with warm amber light that should have felt welcoming and instead felt like a trap decorated to look like home. She was given a room, not a cell. That was the first disorienting thing. A room with an actual bed, actual bookshelves, an actual window overlooking a garden that, even in late October, held the architectural bones of something carefully tended. Fresh clothes in her size had been laid out. Toiletries. A phone, locked, capable of only one contact, sat on the nightstand. A prison designed to look like courtesy. A woman named Rosa, 50s, efficient, unreadable, brought dinner on a tray and answered none of Arya's questions with anything more than a slight tilt of her head. The door wasn't locked. Arya tested it immediately after Rosa left. It opened onto a hallway. The hallway opened onto a staircase. The staircase opened onto a foyer, where two men sat, not aggressively positioned, not armed and obvious, just there in the casual, absolute way of men who knew they were all the barrier that was needed. She went back to her room. She opened her laptop, which had been returned to her, she noticed, but its internet connection had been surgically removed, and opened a fresh document. She would not waste this. If she was here, she was researching. She began to type everything she could remember from the photographs on the walls of his office, the files she'd glimpsed, the layout of this property as she'd observed it on the drive-in. Her thesis had a pulse again, a terrifying, inconvenient pulse. She was 4 pages in when the door opened without a knock. Luca Moretti stood in the doorway in dark trousers and a charcoal sweater, sleeves pushed to his elbows, holding 2 glasses of whiskey. He looked different without the jacket. Not softer. Something more dangerous in its way, more human, more real. The jacket had been armor and costume. This was just him. He observed her typing. Something moved across his expression. Approval, perhaps, or fascination, quickly controlled. "You're documenting. I'm a researcher." She didn't stop typing. "It's a compulsion." He crossed the room and set one of the whiskey glasses beside her. Uninvited. She looked at it, looked at him. He settled into the armchair across the room as if he owned it, which, she reminded herself sharply, he did, and sipped his own drink. "You want to know the rules," he said. "I want to know when I'm going home. Those 2 things are connected." He held her gaze. "You stay here until I've determined how much you know and what you intend to do with it." "Your thesis." "My thesis is academic research. It's not a tip to the FBI, it's not a tell-all. It's a graduate study that 5 professors and approximately no one else will read. The research is thorough enough to be dangerous even in the wrong hands." His voice was very level. "And you were in my private office. Accidentally. Accidents don't care about intent." He tilted his head. "You'll have access to the library downstairs, the gardens during daylight, with an escort. Your meals will be brought to you, or you can eat with the household. Rosa will get you anything you need within reason." A pause. "Don't attempt to contact anyone until I've determined what communication is safe." The word safe landed strangely, like he meant it. "Safe for you," she said. "Or safe for me." He looked at her for a long moment. "In this world, Arya, those are frequently the same thing." She pushed away from the desk and stood, because having this conversation sitting down while he was comfortable felt like conceding something. He watched her stand without surprise, without irritation, like he'd expected it. "You have no right to hold me here," she said. "Whatever my research contains, whatever you think I know, I haven't done anything wrong. I'm a graduate student who got caught in a storm. You're a graduate student who was building a case study on the most protected criminal organization in the Midwest." His voice didn't change. "And you were found in the one room in the world where that could get you killed by someone other than me. Other than you." She seized it. "So you're not planning to kill me. I'm planning to keep you alive," he said, standing smoothly, collecting his glass. "Those are different projects with different requirements." He was at the door when she called after him, frustration and fear and something embarrassingly close to curiosity tangling together in her chest. "What if I don't accept your rules?" He didn't turn around. Didn't need to. Then I'll make new rules, Luca Moretti said simply, that you like even less. The pause before the door closed was exactly one breath long. I own your safety now, Arya. Learn to live in that. The lock didn't click. It didn't need to. The Moretti family had controlled the north side of Chicago for 63 years. Arya already knew this from public records, newspaper archives, court documents, a 1987 Senate committee report that named Luca's father, Antonio Moretti, as the architect of what investigators called the most disciplined and least prosecutable criminal enterprise in American history. Antonio had died of a heart attack 11 years ago, passing the empire to his eldest son with the same quiet authority he'd run it. No ceremony, no contest. Luca had simply become the Don, because the alternative was not surviving the transition. What the public records didn't tell her, what she began to piece together from 3 days of careful observation, was the scope. The Moretti syndicate wasn't the blunt, brutal machine of crime fiction. It was embedded. Port Authority contracts, 4 city aldermen, 2 federal judges, a state senator, and enough legitimate businesses to launder its revenues through the arteries of Chicago's economy like blood through a body. It was infrastructure. It was the city's shadow government. And Luca ran it with a precision that, even from the outside, and even as its captive, she found genuinely frightening in how intelligent it was. She saw him at breakfast on the 3rd day. He was already at the table when she came down, reviewing documents, Marco Vitelli at his shoulder murmuring figures she couldn't catch. He looked up when she entered, and that brief, contained attention felt like being caught in a spotlight. Sleep well? As if she were a guest. Does that matter to you? Everything about you matters to me right now. He said it so flatly, so practically, without any heat or intention behind it, as if it were simply a logistical truth, that she sat down and buttered her toast without responding, because she genuinely didn't have an answer. Marco poured her coffee. Black. Without asking. She noticed he'd observed her preference from the first morning. These men catalogued everything. Your mother died 4 years ago, Luca said, over the table, between one page and the next. Cancer. You've been funding your education on academic scholarships and a TAW position. Your father, James Calloway, died 18 months ago. She put down her toast. You researched me. I told you. I've been watching you for 3 months. Why? The question had been pressing on her since the office. Why would you? I was no one to you before that night. A random student writing a thesis. He set down his papers, looked at her fully, and that was different from glancing, from the peripheral awareness he typically maintained. When Luca Moretti looked at you fully, it was like being mapped. Your father owed me a debt, he said. $40,000 borrowed 4 years ago when your mother was sick and his medical insurance had limits. He came to people who came to me. He folded his hands. He died before it was repaid. The debt transferred, that's the code. It would have transferred to you. The coffee went cold in her hands. And, she said carefully, and I cleared it. The simplicity of it. The complete absence of drama. I canceled the debt 18 months ago without collection. You've been living free of it without knowing it existed. She stared at him. Why? Something passed across his face, not quite discomfort, but the expression of a man unused to being asked to articulate things he'd decided in private. Your father was a decent man who made one desperate choice. You were 20 years old, grieving your mother, and working 2 jobs to stay in school. His jaw was set. I don't collect from grieving children. Don't collect from grieving children. Said by a man who had ordered an execution 4 floors below, where she'd been sleeping. But you've been watching me, she pressed. That's not just clearing a debt. No, he agreed. It's not. He didn't elaborate. He picked up his papers, and Marco refilled his coffee, and the conversation closed like a door, and Arya sat there understanding that she had just received a fragment of something. Some truth about this man that he hadn't intended to give this fully, and she needed to treat it carefully, or heed. Never open again. That afternoon, in the library, she found the history. The books on the shelves were real, annotated in a handwriting she was beginning to recognize, cramped, precise, occasionally accompanied by a question mark that suggested a man who disagreed with authors even in private. Philosophy, military history, art, 3 shelves of Italian literature, and 1 unexpected section of poetry. Neruda, Keats, a battered roomie with a cracked spine that had clearly been opened hundreds of times. She was pulling the roomie from the shelf when she heard it, shouting from somewhere below. Then a crash. Then Marco's voice, clipped and controlled, and Luca's voice beneath it, low, colder than anything she'd heard, with an edge in it that cut through stone walls and library floors. She moved to the window. In the courtyard below, 2 men were being held at gunpoint by 4 of Luca's soldiers. The men were unfamiliar, their clothes wrong for this household, their hands raised in postures of surrender that didn't fully suppress the aggression underneath. One of them was bleeding from his lip. She watched Luca walk out into the courtyard. No jacket, no weapon visible, just him, and the absolute authority of his posture in the cold October air, and the way all 6 other men recalibrated their positions the instant he appeared. He spoke to the captured men for 40 seconds. She couldn't hear the words. Then he turned and walked back inside, and the 2 men were taken away, and she understood from every tone and gesture that she would not be seeing them again. She pressed the roomie to her chest and thought, I am researching the most dangerous man in Chicago from inside his library. Behind her, the library door opened. You shouldn't stand at the window, Luca said, coming to stand beside her. Close, but not touching, his presence warm and solid and smelling of cedar and something darker beneath. Someone is watching the property, looking for weaknesses. Looking for me? She asked. He didn't answer. Which was an answer. Who? She pressed. Sebastian Rossi. He said the name like he was placing a chess piece. He's been testing my perimeter for 2 weeks. He knows I have something new. His eyes moved to her face, then away. Something worth taking. The words settled over her like a second storm. You should go back to your room before dinner, he said quietly. She looked up at him, at the strong jaw and the controlled eyes and the battered roomie in her hands, and said, Someone's coming for us, aren't they? The silence between them stretched tight as wire. Go to your room, Arya. She went. But at the door she turned back and caught him watching her, not the surveillance of a captor, not the calculation of a strategist. Something raw, something that, if she'd seen it on any other face in any other context, she would have called longing. The garden lights came on at dusk. From her window she watched 2 of Luca's men patrol the tree line, and in the shadows beyond the fence, still, patient, present, she saw the faint ember glow of a cigarette. Someone was already here. She found the photograph on a Tuesday, tucked between pages of a military history text in the library, used as a bookmark perhaps, or simply forgotten. A photograph, 2 boys on a beach, somewhere Mediterranean by the light and the quality of the old film. One older, maybe 12, dark-haired and serious even at that age, squinting against the sun. One younger, perhaps 7, laughing with his whole body, arms thrown wide. She was still holding it when Luca came to the library doorway. The silence that followed was different from his usual silences, charged differently. She looked up and found something undone in his face, not quite vulnerable, because she suspected vulnerable was not a state this man permitted himself, but unguarded in a way she hadn't seen. That's your brother, she said. Not a question. She'd read about Matteo Moretti in the public records. Died at 19, manner listed as undetermined in a report sealed by court order. Luca crossed the room and held out his hand for the photograph. She gave it to him. Their fingers touched in the exchange, brief, accidental, the simple physics of a handoff. But he didn't move back, and neither did she, and the accidental touch became a held moment, his fingers loose around hers. He was 7 in that photograph, Luca said. We were in Sicily, visiting our grandfather. What happened to him? She knew better than to ask. Asked anyway. He got involved with people he shouldn't have at 17. Luca was looking at the photograph, not her. Tried to prove himself. Went on a run for a rival outfit to impress them. They killed him for knowing too much. His thumb moved across the photograph's surface. I was 23. I'd just taken over from my father. I found out about the men who gave the order. His voice was completely level. 3 months later, those men no longer existed. She said nothing. There was nothing to say to that. I keep the photograph as a reminder, he said, finally looking up, that there are consequences for everything. For trusting the wrong people. For letting people in. He looked at her steadily. For care. That sounds like a warning. She said softly. It is. He didn't look away. For both of us, the thunder outside was low, rolling, another storm building, as if the weather were mirroring them. In the library's warm light with rain beginning to tap the windows, standing close enough that she could see the detail of his eyes, dark brown, almost black, but with something in them when he looked at her that she hadn't seen directed at anything or anyone else in the days she'd been here. The situation felt telescoped, condensed into this room, this moment, this impossible proximity. Your research, he said, setting the photograph carefully on the shelf. You understand more about this world than most people who live in it. I understand the theory of it. Tell me something that surprised you. In your research. About me. She considered deflecting. Chose honesty instead, because something about this room, this rain, this man with his photograph of a laughing boy, dismantled her deflections. That you've funded 6 community centers in the neighborhoods where your operation runs. Anonymously. No tax benefit, no public credit. She paused. The criminology framework doesn't really have a category for that. A man who only takes eventually has nothing left to take from. Simple. Pragmatic. And, yet, that's not why you did it. He looked at her sharply. Matteo went wrong because the neighborhood had nothing to offer him, she said carefully. You're trying to prevent it. For other people's brothers. She held his gaze. That's not crime management. That's grief. The storm hit the windows hard. He closed the distance between them. Not aggressively, nothing jarring, nothing that startled her. Just a single step that brought him close enough that she had to tilt her chin up to maintain eye contact. Close enough that the warmth of him displaced the library's cool air. His hand came up, and she held perfectly still. Not fear, not submission, but that peculiar charged stillness of someone standing at a threshold. His thumb traced the small scar on her chin. Just that, gentle in a way that seemed to cost him something, precise in a way that suggested he'd been looking at that scar since the first night and wanting to do exactly this. How? He asked. My mother's hospital bed rail. I was holding her hand when she went. I fell. She swallowed. Ridiculous thing to scar from. Not ridiculous. His thumb was still there. A single point of contact that somehow mattered more than any elaborate touch might have. It's the shape of a moment you loved someone enough to be destroyed by. And then she made the mistake of looking at his mouth. Or perhaps it wasn't a mistake. Perhaps it was the most accurate navigation she'd done in years. He kissed her. Soft. God, he was soft. In a way that made no sense alongside everything else he was. His hand cradled her jaw like she was made of something irreplaceable, and his mouth on hers was unhurried and devastating, tasting of the coffee from breakfast and asking rather than taking, which somehow undid her more completely than any demand would have. She kissed him back. That was the moment everything changed. Not when he kissed her, but when she chose to answer. He felt it, the choice. And a sound left him that was quiet and contained, but she felt it against her lips like a frequency she'd been calibrated for. He pulled back first. Controlled. Always controlled. But his breathing was different, and his forehead rested against hers for exactly 3 seconds before he straightened. He started. Don't apologize for it, she said quickly, because she couldn't survive his regret right now. Not with her heart doing what it was doing. His eyes, dark, burning, containing something vast and controlled and newly restless. I was going to say that was inevitable. A beat. But it changes nothing about the danger you're in, about what I am. I know what you are. You know the theory of me. An echo of her earlier words. His voice was rough at the edges now, and she liked it, and that was extremely inconvenient. You don't know the practice. From downstairs, Marco's voice, urgent, clipped. Luca's name and 2 words she caught. Perimeter breach. He was gone before she finished drawing her next breath. She stood in the library with rain on the windows, and his warmth still ghosted against her lips, and the photograph of a laughing 7-year-old boy on the shelf behind her. I'll burn the world for you. She didn't know yet that these were words he'd someday say to her. But standing in that library, she felt them forming somewhere, taking shape in the charged atmosphere between them like lightning deciding where to strike. Her secret came out on a Thursday, and she was the one who told it. Because Luca found the second document. Not in her laptop, Marco had checked that thoroughly and found nothing beyond the academic thesis. In her backpack, in the hidden zip pocket that she'd forgotten, contained a printed email thread, 6 months of correspondence with a senior FBI agent named Patterson, who ran the organized crime division in Chicago. He slid the papers across the breakfast table without a word. She looked at them, looked at him, thought, for one moment, about lying. I'm not an informant, she said. I'm reading you offering to share your research findings. Sharing academic research isn't. Arya. Just her name. A scalpel. She put down her fork. Patterson contacted me 8 months ago. Said my thesis research was unusually accurate and asked if I'd be willing to share methodology with his task force. I said I'd think about it. She met his eyes. I never provided anything. I kept stalling. I hadn't decided. Why hadn't you decided? His voice gave nothing away. Because my research wasn't, she stopped, chose truth. Because the further I got into it, the more complicated the picture became. The Morettis operation isn't what the FBI file says it is. She gestured between them awkwardly. You're not what the FBI file says you are. I couldn't in good conscience hand them a roadmap to something I didn't fully understand. The silence stretched long enough to be an organism. You were protecting me, he said slowly. Without knowing me, I was protecting my research integrity. But even she could hear that it was only half the truth. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, 3 years ago, I had a federal agent killed. He was dirty, taking payments from the Rossi family to frame my soldiers, but he still wore a badge. He watched her face. I need you to understand what you're sitting across from. I know, you're saying that very calmly. I'm screaming internally. A beat. But I also know you canceled my father's debt because he was a decent man who made one desperate choice. She held his gaze. You contain multitudes, Luca Moretti. My thesis says so. Something that might, on a warmer face, have been a smile. On his face, it was more like a controlled release of pressure. Patterson is going to come looking for you, he said. I know. Which means I have an FBI problem alongside my Rossi problem. He stood, moved to the window, hands in his pockets, a posture she'd come to recognize as him thinking through chess moves. Marco appeared from the hallway doorway, with the immediacy of someone who had never been far. Run, Patterson. I want to know what he knows about Arya's location and when he knew it. Luca turned back to her. Did you tell Patterson anything about your research target before the storm? No. Did he know you were coming to the Meridian building? Her stomach tightened. I sent him an email the afternoon of the storm. I said I was going to the library at University Club to work, but the weather changed and I diverted. I didn't tell him where I ended up. She paused. But my thesis notes were on that laptop. My browser history was research into the Meridian Tower's tenant list. Luca's expression didn't change, but his stillness changed quality, became something more focused, more dangerous. He could trace it, she said. He already has, Luca said. Marco, the meeting with Vincent at 3. Push it. I need to discuss our southern perimeter. He looked at Arya. Come with me. Where? Downstairs. There's something you need to see. The basement of the compound was not a dungeon. Another of her expectations dismantled. It was clean, purposeful, a security monitoring room, an armory she was not invited to examine closely, and a training space currently occupied by 2 of Luca's soldiers running through drills. "Watch," he said. She watched. The 2 men were good, fast, disciplined, efficient. One of them caught her looking and smirked. "Show me the same scenario," Luca said to the soldier with the smirk. Against her, the soldier's smirk became confusion. "Dawn. Simulation. Half speed." Luca looked at Arya. "You took 2 years of Krav Maga. I know because I watched you at the gym on Wabash for 3 months. She stared at him. "You are deeply invasive." "Yes." "Show me." She wasn't sure, even afterward, what made her do it. Pride. Maybe. Or the need to prove something to this room full of men who had been looking at her like a delicate inconvenience since she arrived. The soldier came at her, half speed, as instructed, and she moved on instinct. 3 years of training overriding thought, inside his reach, elbow to his sternum, hip pivot, his arm redirected, his balance broken, him on the mat. Not graceful, not perfect, but effective. The silence in the training room was a particular quality of silence, the kind that precedes recalibration. Luca was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Something open, something that didn't immediately close. "All right," he said quietly. "Did I pass your test?" "You passed something more important." He came close, that gravitational closeness that had become its own language between them. "I need to know you can survive this. Because what's coming," his jaw tightened. "Rossi isn't playing politics anymore. He sent men to my perimeter last night. He knows I have you. He's going to try to use you against me." "Then let me go," she said. "If I'm the vulnerability." "No. Immediate. Absolute. No deliberation. You are not going anywhere near Rossi, Luca, Arya." His hand came to her face, that gesture she was beginning to recognize, the cradling of her jaw that he did when he needed her to hear him. "I let things become dangerous for Matteo because I thought distance protected people. I was 23 and I learned it wrong." His thumb brushed her cheekbone. "I don't make the same mistake twice. This is different." "No," he said, very low. "It isn't." From upstairs, Marco called. Something urgent. Something about Vincent and the Eastern checkpoint. Luca stepped back. Put his walls back up in the efficient way he had. "Stay with Rosa today. Don't go to the windows on the south side." She caught his sleeve as he turned. He stilled. "The betrayal you're afraid of," she said. Because she'd been watching him for days now. The way he looked at his consigliere Vincent Greco. The quality of his silences when Vincent's name came up. The slight recalculation when Vincent left any room. "It's already in the house, isn't it?" The look he gave her was long and complicated and entirely honest. "Get some rest, Arya." He didn't deny it. That night, she heard raised voices in Luca's study. Then silence. Then Marco's boots in the corridor. Fast, purposeful, alarmed. She was still awake at midnight when she heard Luca's car leave through the front gate. She pressed her ear to the cold window. Somewhere in the dark beyond the trees, she thought she heard a phone ringing. Betrayal suspected. She had no idea yet how right she was. The ambush came on a Friday evening. Arya was in the garden, south side, which Luca had told her to avoid, but it had been 9 days, and the restrictions were becoming walls inside walls, and she needed air when she heard the vehicles. 3 of them coming fast down the private road. Not Moretti vehicles. The shape of them wrong, the speed wrong, the complete absence of the radio communication that preceded Luca's household movements. She ran, not toward the house, toward the tree line on the north side, instinct overriding everything, her body making the decision before her mind had finished processing. She'd been studying this property for 9 days with the focused attention of someone who understood that geography was survival. She knew the north fence had a loose section. She knew. The first shot hit the garden wall to her left, and she dropped to a crouch, changing direction, and then hands closed on her arms, hard, pulling her backwards, and she drove her elbow back and connected with something solid before a voice registered. "It's me. Marco." His face was bloody from a cut above his eye, and his expression was the most unguarded she'd seen from any of Luca's men. Pure, undisguised fear. Not for himself. Inside, he said. Now, they ran. The compound had become a different place in the 30 seconds since she'd first heard the vehicles. 6 of Luca's men materialized from positions she hadn't known existed, moving with terrifying efficiency, the house transforming from a domestic space into a military one. Furniture repositioned, windows shuttered from steel panels she hadn't known were inside the walls. Communications crackling. Rosa appeared from the kitchen corridor and took Arya's arm without a word and pressed her toward the center of the house. Internal rooms. No exterior walls. Solid core. Luca, Arya said. Where? He went to meet them, Marco said, reloading a weapon with practiced calm. At the front. She heard it then. From the front of the property, a controlled, measured sequence of violence that was nothing like the explosive chaos of movie gunfights. It was surgical. 3 shots, then silence, then 2 shots, then a shout cut short. She heard one voice giving orders through it all. Low, commanding, certain, and she knew the voice. Then she heard nothing. She broke away from Rosa. Nobody could stop her because nobody expected it, and she was already through the kitchen door and into the front corridor before Marco's shout caught up with her, and she pushed open the heavy front door and... Luca. Standing in the compound's circular drive. 4 men on the ground around him, Rossi's soldiers, she'd learn later, a scouting team sent to test defenses and abduct the asset. Luca's white shirt was dark at the shoulder from a graze she'd have to fight him for an hour to let her look at later. His gun was at his side. The absolute stillness of him, not the stillness of relief, but the stillness of a man completing a calculation. He looked up and found her. The stillness broke. He crossed the drive in 4 strides and she met him halfway, and his arms came around her with a force that surprised her. Not rough but fervent, encompassing. His chin dropped to the top of her head, and his grip said things his voice wasn't currently capable of saying. I told you. He started, voice raw. I know, she said against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat, fast, not controlled. I know. South side. I know. I'm sorry, his grip tightened. She felt him breathe, one long deep breath, the kind that contains an entire storm weathered and survived. Then his hands moved to her face, and he pulled back enough to look at her, searching every feature, cataloging her the way she cataloged him, making certain. You're not hurt, he said. Not a question, a declaration, as if insisting on its truth could make it permanent. Not hurt, she confirmed. And then something moved in his eyes, something that had been building since the library and the photograph and the kiss and the training room, something that had run out of space to be contained. You're mine, he said. Low, absolute. Not possessive in the way of property, possessive in the way of someone who has just understood what they would destroy entire cities to protect. Do you understand me? Mine. I will raise everything, every enemy, every threat, every future in which you're not standing here. To keep you whole. She looked at him, bloody at the shoulder, devastatingly human, the most dangerous man in Chicago telling her she was the thing he'd burn the world for, and felt her own walls, brick by careful brick, come down. You're going to be an absolute nightmare to be in love with, she said. His breath caught. She didn't look away. I know, she said. I know exactly what that means and what you are, and I know anyway. She pressed her palm flat against his chest, over his heart. This. Whatever this is. I know. He kissed her there, in the drive, with 4 unconscious men around them and the storm rolling in and his soldiers tactfully failing to see anything, kissed her with the desperation of a man who had learned to want nothing and found himself wanting everything. Bella mia, he breathed against her lips. My beautiful, inconvenient girl. You're what? She said. Mine, he said again. Simpler, final, forever. Say it back, she almost didn't. She almost made him work for it. But his shoulder was bleeding and he'd run toward gunfire, and she'd met a 7-year-old boy in a photograph, and she understood now why the roomy spine was cracked. "Yours," she said quietly. He closed his eyes. Inside, Rosa was making tea, and Marco was making calls, and Vincent Greco was standing at the edge of the corridor watching them through the door, his face doing something complicated that neither of them were looking at. Later, she would understand what that expression had been. Later. Not yet. War is coming, and they had tonight. The war declaration came on a Monday, delivered the way Rossi delivered everything, with theatrical brutality and no apology. Marco Vitelli's second in command, a young soldier named Danny with a wife and 3 months left before his planned exit from the life, was found outside Moretti territory in the early hours. A message. Deliberate. Cruel. The Rossi family's language written in someone else's blood. Luca received the news at 4 a.m. Arya woke to the sound of his voice in the corridor, not raised, but with a quality in it she hadn't heard before, something that had moved past cold and into something she didn't have a word for. She dressed and came to the doorway of his study, and he was at his desk, phone in hand, Marco across from him, white-faced and composed in the way of someone who will not allow themselves to be anything else. She didn't intrude. She stood in the doorway, and he looked up and found her there, and something in his face, the thing that had been building since her arrival, the thing that had been given a name in the drive 2 nights ago, came to the surface, briefly, through the terrible news. He looked at her like she was the reason to hold on to himself. Then, he looked back at Marco and began to speak, and the war began. The next 48 hours rewrote the city. Luca moved against Rossi's operations with precision she could only partially observe. The comings and goings from the compound, the encrypted phone calls, the strategy sessions she wasn't present for but heard the edges of. 3 of Rossi's port contracts were disrupted simultaneously. A warehouse in Pilsen that the Rossi family used for distribution was emptied of everything valuable, and then reported anonymously to the fire marshal for code violations. The city alderman who'd been playing both sides received a quiet visit from 2 of Luca's men, and subsequently developed a fierce loyalty to only one. Surgical. Devastating. Controlled. But Rossi was not a man who accepted the surgical. On Wednesday, he struck back at something that wasn't a business. Danny Park, Arya's best friend, who had been actively trying to locate her for 13 days, made the mistake of going to the Meridian Tower herself. She was intercepted 3 blocks away by 2 men who had been watching the building for Rossi. They didn't hurt her. They were smarter than that. They left her with a phone number and a message. "Tell Calloway we have a conversation she'll want to have." Danny, terrifyingly brave and completely uninformed about what she'd stumbled into, called the number. Rossi told her exactly what he wanted, and exactly what would happen if he didn't get it. It was Marco who intercepted the subsequent search. Danny had been trying to find any trail to Arya's location, and her browser searches had pinged a flag on Luca's monitoring system that was watching for exactly that kind of activity. Marco brought it to Luca, and then, after a look between them, Luca brought it to Arya. She read the intercept report. Her hands were steady. Her heart was not. "He wants me delivered to him," she said. "He wants leverage over me," Luca corrected. "You are the leverage, my friend. Is safe. She's being picked up right now and brought here." His eyes met hers. "She's going to have a great deal of questions. She's going to have approximately 10,000 questions." Arya pressed her hand to her forehead. "Luca, I can't let Danny be in danger because of me. She's not in danger anymore. She's in my protection." He paused. As of approximately 20 minutes ago, she looked at him. "You already arranged it." "Before you told me, yes." She wanted to be angry about the presumption. She couldn't quite manage it. "Thank you. Don't thank me." She punched one of my men in the face when he tried to help her into the car. Something very close to amusement, quickly contained. She thought he was Rossi's. Despite everything, despite Danny and the war and the message written in blood, Arya laughed. Brief, broken, real. He touched her hand. Just fingertips. Brief. "Stay inside tonight," he said. "All of you. Tomorrow I'm going to end this." Vincent Greco appeared in the doorway. Luca, the council wants a meeting. Rossi is requesting formal arbitration. Rossi doesn't want arbitration, Marco said flatly. He wants to know where we're positioned. We'll attend, Luca said. It tells us what we need to know about his current strength. He looked at Vincent. Arrange it for Thursday. Neutral ground, the Marquette Club. Vincent nodded, withdrew. Marco waited until his footsteps were gone, then Dawn. The Southern Perimeter Report. Someone from inside gave Rossi the patrol schedule. The sentence landed in the room like a stone in still water. Luca was very still. How long have you known? I suspected. Confirmed it an hour ago. Marco's voice was carefully level. 3-week-old schedule change. Only 8 people knew the new timing. He paused. Only one person had direct contact with Rossi's man Ferrero last month. He didn't say the name. He didn't need to. Arya watched Luca's face and saw something happen there that she recognized from her own experience of loss. The exact moment when the person you trusted most becomes the wound you can't ignore. Thursday, Luca said finally. His voice had that quality again, the one beyond cold. We'll confirm it Thursday. That night, Arya lay awake listening to the house breathe around her and thought about chess games where the pieces you trust are your greatest vulnerability. Somewhere in the city, Sebastian Rossi was making the same calculation. Her life directly threatened, and she didn't know yet how directly, how soon, how final. She was taken on Thursday morning. Not at the council meeting, that would have been too obvious, too easy to plan against. Rossi was cleverer than that. He struck in the seam between preparation and execution, in the 40-minute window when the compound's security briefly redistributed for the meeting's departure. Arya was with Danny in the library. Danny, who had been housed in the compound for 36 hours and had spent those hours in a state of furious, terrified, grudging adaptation, was drinking her 3rd coffee of the morning and regarding Arya with the expression of someone rebuilding their entire understanding of a friend. You have feelings for him, Danny said, bluntly, because Danny had no other setting. That's not relevant right now. You have massive feelings for the head of the Chicago Mafia who kidnapped you. He kept me safe. That's what I said. Danny pointed at her. Massive feelings. The library window exploded inward. Not a bullet, a gas canister, dispersing fast, filling the room with a chemical fog that burned and disoriented. Arya grabbed Danny, pulled her toward the door, but the door was already opening from the outside and there were hands. And the gas was working, and the last thing she clearly registered before the darkness came was Danny screaming her name, and the rough grip of someone dragging her toward a window. And the desperate thought, he told me not to be near the south windows. She woke in a room she didn't recognize. Concrete walls. Industrial. Somewhere in the city, she thought, from the distant sound of traffic. Wrists zip-tied to a metal chair. Her throat burned from the gas. Her head was a fog that was slowly, reluctantly clearing. Across the room, Sebastian Rossi sat watching her with the particular patience of a man who enjoys anticipation. He was older than she'd imagined from research. Silver-haired, elegantly dressed, with eyes the color of weathered stone. He looked like a professor, the kind who had mastered making students feel small. Miss Calloway. His accent was faintly Milanese. I apologize for the method. Necessary unpleasantness. Where's my friend? Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. Miss Park is unharmed. Still at the compound, I believe. He rose, moved to a sideboard, poured 2 glasses of water, placed one on the floor near her feet, an almost courteous gesture that was nonetheless completely controlled. I don't want to hurt anyone who doesn't require hurting. You killed Danny. Something crossed his face, a flicker of genuine distaste, gone quickly. My people were overzealous. It was not a sanctioned action. He sat again, folding his hands. I want Luca Moretti's cooperation regarding the Port Authority contracts. Specifically, I want the Northern Terminals arrangement transferred to joint operation. He studied her. You are going to help me communicate that desire in a way that makes its acceptance inevitable. By being leverage, you're a practical girl. I appreciate that. He reached into his jacket and removed a phone, turned the screen toward her. It showed a live feed, the compound's front gate. He will negotiate. Men like Luca always negotiate when the alternative is someone they care about. What I need from you is simply presence. He won't give you what you want, she said. You know that. You've studied him as long as I have. Rossi smiled. No, but he'll give me enough to make continuing worthwhile. He set the phone down. All you need to do is sit here and wait for him to arrive. She looked at him. At the room, at the zip ties and the concrete walls and the distance between this chair and the door. She calculated very quickly. May I have that water? She said. He gestured permission. She bent awkwardly, managed the glass between her bound wrists, drank, bought herself time, counted exits. One door, no windows, 2 guards visible at the room's edges. Rossi himself, no obvious weapon on his person, but certainly armed. She had Krav Maga training and a plan forming in the back of her mind that was 60% desperation and 40% resolve. She also had more information about Rossi's operation from her research than he knew she had. The industrial district near Goose Island, she said conversationally. This is one of your warehouse properties, the one you acquired through the Ferrero Holding Company in 2019. She watched his expression recalibrate. I researched you too, Mr. Rossi. Extensively. She met his eyes. Your holding company's property portfolio is entirely public record. You have an excellent memory. I have an excellent thesis. She tilted her head. Which means by now the people I love know exactly where to find this address. It was a bluff. A high stakes, all-in bluff. But Rossi's eyes moved, just briefly, just involuntarily, to the guards, and back to her. And she saw him run the calculation, and she saw the first thread of uncertainty. Meanwhile, 12 miles away, Luca Moretti had come home to a broken library window and no Arya, and whatever had been contained inside him for 34 years was now completely, catastrophically, finally loose. Marco had never seen his Don like this. In 15 years of service, he had seen Luca angry, controlled fury, always controlled. He had seen him ruthless. He had seen him grieving. When Matteo died, a silence so deep and total it had lasted weeks. He had never seen him this. Unraveled. The composed chess master stillness simply was not there. He moved through the compound like a force that had been released from its housing, clipped and rapid and absolutely dangerous. The location, he said. Working on it, Marco said. Vincent, and here Marco hesitated, because the confirmation had come in 20 minutes before Arya was taken, and the confirmation was what they'd suspected, and the timing was. Vincent gave Rossi the window, Marco said. Luca stopped moving. We pulled his communications an hour ago. He's been in contact with Rossi's operation for 4 weeks. Marco's voice was very careful. He told them about the schedule. He told them about the council meeting today. He told them which room she was in. The silence was unlike anything Marco had experienced from this man. Then Luca said, with perfect quiet, Where is he now? Downstairs. Waiting for the council meeting debrief. Lock him in the security room. Luca straightened his jacket, that gesture, the cufflinks, the mechanical return to composure even now. Even in this. We'll deal with him after we bring her home. He turned. Goose Island. His Ferrero Holding. I know the property. Pull the floor plan. Don. How do you? Arya knew the property, Luca said. And something passed through his face. Pride and fear and love all at once, undisguised, just for that instant. She would have told him she knew it. She would have used it. He was already moving. She's buying us time. Almost too late, but not quite. Not for them. There is a particular quality to Chicago at 3 a.m. The city doesn't sleep, it breathes differently. A slow, industrial breath that fills the streets with the sounds of distant freight and riverside machinery and the occasional wail of a siren cutting through the dark. The warehouse district near Goose Island held all of this, and none of the warmth, Concrete and steel and the cold coming off the river, merciless, final. 6 vehicles. No lights on the approach. Luca went in first. Not because his men would have permitted it. They were professional, trained, and absolutely did not permit it. He simply went first, and they adapted their formation around him, because that was what you did when the dawn had a look in his eyes that suggested the alternative was being left behind. Marco came second, close enough to cover him. The building's perimeter was lightly guarded. Rossi had been confident in the secrecy of the location, and that confidence was his mistake. 3 guards on the exterior, dealt with efficiently, quietly in the shadow language of men who were very good at this. The 4th guard at the entrance took slightly longer because he was smarter than the others, and Luca's shoulder, already grazed from Friday, took another insult that he completely failed to acknowledge. Inside, a main floor warehouse, a staircase, an upper level, light under a door. He went through it without slowing. The room, concrete walls, Rossi standing at the far end with his hand on a weapon already coming up, 2 guards converging, and Arya. Arya was already mid-motion. She had her wrists free, the zip tie cut with a piece of metal she'd worked loose from the chair's arm during the hours of waiting, and she'd been watching the door, and the moment it opened she was moving. Chair swung hard, catching 1 guard across the face. Her body low, clearing the line of fire with the instinct of someone who had thought through every geometry of this room and made her plans. The 2nd guard grabbed her. Luca shot him in the shoulder, precisely, not the kill he wanted to make, the kill he restrained himself from making. Because killing was easy, and protecting her was the goal, and she needed that guard removed, not dead. The guard went down. Rossi's weapon was up. And here is what Marco Vitelli would describe later, when the story became the kind of legend that circulates in the closed rooms of the city's underworld. Luca Moretti walked directly toward a drawn and cocked weapon as if it were simply an inconvenience. Not bravado, not performance. The pure functional certainty of a man for whom the equation had simplified completely to, she is on the other side of you. Rossi fired. Luca moved, barely, and the shot grazed his upper arm, and he covered the remaining distance in 2 steps. And Rossi's weapon was no longer in his hand, and Rossi was on the floor with Luca's knee on his chest, and the cold precision of a gun barrel against his temple. Silence. Arya's breathing, her hand pressing against the wall for balance. Her eyes finding him across the room, and the way she looked at him, the specific intensity of that gray gaze, the contained terror and relief and love all at once. He felt it like a physical thing. Luca, she said. Just that. He held Rossi's gaze for 5 full seconds. Let him feel the full weight of what was being decided in those seconds. Then he stood, stepped back, handed the weapon to Marco. Secure him, he said. He crossed the room to her. She met him halfway, which was very her, he thought. This woman who met him in the middle of everything. And he pulled her in, not gently, with the fervent grip of someone who has spent 6 hours in a state of controlled horror and cannot maintain the control another moment. She was shaking. He could feel it, fine tremors she'd been suppressing, the adrenaline leaving now that it could, the terror that had been sublimated into action now surfacing. You cut the zip tie, he said against her hair. I've been thinking about this room for 8 hours, she said into his chest. You moved before I reached the guard. I didn't want you to have to. He pulled back enough to look at her face, cataloging, confirming, his hands on her jaw with that cradling care. Are you hurt? Gas headache. Pride's fine. Her hands gripped his jacket. You're bleeding again. I'm fine. You are categorically. Fine, he said firmly. And then, because he could not say anything less true in this moment, I was afraid. He never said that. He would never say it to another living soul. I was very afraid. Her expression did something complicated and final and irrevocable. Never leaving you again, she said, and it sounded like a vow. Never. Do you understand me? Moya signora, he said softly. My lady. That was always my line. Marco appeared in the doorway. His expression was professionally neutral in the way of a man exercising great restraint. Dawn. Vincent is secured at the compound. A pause. Rossi is cooperating. He's talking about terms. He'll talk about more than terms, Luca said, not looking away from Arya. One more thing. Marco's voice changed quality. Rossi's man Ferrero was with him tonight. When we came in, he tried to run. My boys stopped him. A beat. He had files on him. Physical files. Looks like your full operation, Don. Ports, territories, contacts. A handover package, the kind you prepare when you're giving someone everything. Luca went still. Vincent had been thorough, Marco said quietly. This was the final drop. Tonight was the handover. Rossi's voice, from across the room where two of Luca's men held him. I paid very well for that information, Moretti. Your man was motivated. Luca looked at Arya. She looked back at him. One of us might die tonight, he said. Not to her. To the room, to the city, to Sebastian Rossi, who was going to wish he had chosen a different obsession. But it won't be either of us. The final hour came on a Thursday. Not with gunfire. That would have been simpler. It came in the private room of the Marquette Club, where the old city made its real decisions behind mahogany and good whiskey, with 6 of Chicago's power figures watching, and Rossi across a table that had hosted treaty and betrayal in equal measure for 70 years. Luca had prepared for 3 days. Arya had helped, which was still something that made Marco quietly incredulous and privately grateful. She knew Rossi's public-facing operations with the precision of a researcher who had used him as secondary material in her thesis, and that knowledge, combined with Luca's internal intelligence, had produced a case against Rossi that was airtight, comprehensive, and completely devastating. You've been building a takeover for 2 years, Luca said. Port contracts, aldermen, the federal connection through Patterson, and here, he looked at Arya, a brief acknowledgement. Because the Patterson thread had been hers to trace, Patterson had not been independently interested in her research. He'd been directed to it by Rossi's people, who'd identified her thesis as a potential intelligence source on the Moretti operation. You used a graduate student to spy on my empire. Rossi's composure was excellent. Academic research is publicly available. You had Vincent Greco turned 18 months ago. You've been receiving briefings on my operation while sitting at my table for arbitration sessions, while shaking my hand, while attending my father's memorial. Luca's voice had not risen once. It was this quality of his, she thought, watching from behind him, the perfect controlled quiet, the absence of theatrical anger, that was truly frightening to people who understood it. I have his communications. All of them. I have your financial records through 4 holding companies. I have the testimony of your man Ferrero, who was very cooperative once he understood what cooperative looked like versus the alternative. He placed a folder on the table. Slim, cream-colored, understated. This is the complete file, Luca said. It goes to the council if you resist. It goes to the relevant federal investigators, the clean ones, not Patterson, if you run. It goes to the Tribune if you attempt anything further. He sat back. Or you surrender the port contracts, remove yourself from Chicago operations permanently, and the file stays with me. Rossi looked at the folder, looked at Luca, looked at Arya standing to Luca's right, because he'd demanded she be present and she had agreed with the simple practicality that she usually brought to things that frightened her. She's not what I expected, Rossi said, with a shade of something that was almost genuine. A liability I thought you'd acquired. She's been useful to you. She's been everything, Luca said. Plainly, without armor. Rossi reached for the folder, opened it, read it for 4 minutes while the room held its collective breath. Then he took a pen from his pocket and signed the transfer documents that Luca's lawyers had prepared. The Chicago War ended not with blood, but with ink and the quiet scratch of a pen across paper. In the corner of the room, Marco permitted himself a very small exhale. Rossi stood, straightened his jacket, looked at Luca with something that might, in a different world, have been respect. 40 years in this city and I've never met a Don who reads poetry. A glance at Arya. or one who finds a reason to change. He left. The room emptied of witnesses. Luca sat at the table for a long moment, and Arya sat beside him, and neither of them said anything while the weight of the last 3 weeks lifted by degrees from the air around them. "Vincent," she said finally, "is in a cell beneath the compound." His voice was quiet. He will not be held there indefinitely, but his future is no longer in Chicago, and it is no longer comfortable. He paused. He was 52 years old, my father's man, someone I trusted more than almost anyone. His jaw was set. "I grieve that. I am allowed to grieve that." "Yes," she said. "You are." He looked at her. "It's finally over," she said. "This particular war," he agreed. "There will be others. There are always others." He reached across the table and took her hand, not urgently, not dramatically, just taking her hand with the easy certainty of someone who has decided this is where his hand lives now. "But I have a better intelligence operation than I did 3 weeks ago." She laughed, startled out of it, genuine. "Are you calling me an intelligence operation? I'm calling you the smartest person currently employed by the Moretti family. I'm not employed." "We'll negotiate that," he said. His eyes were warm, deeply warm, in the particular way that eyes are when someone has made a decision they're completely at peace with. "We have time." His losses were mourned in private. In the days that followed, Danny, who had 3 months left, the trust he'd placed in Vincent, the pieces of his empire that would need rebuilding. He grieved with the contained, honest grief of a man who knew how to carry heavy things, and she stayed beside him while he carried them. This, she thought, was its own kind of love. November came in gold and gray, and the compound breathed differently. Not softly. It was still the operational center of the most powerful organized crime family in the Midwest. Men still came and went. Calls still ran at all hours. Marco still appeared in doorways with the expression of someone managing 17 things simultaneously. The work of an empire did not stop, because one war had ended. But there was a different quality to the light in the house. Arya noticed it first in the small things, the library door left open instead of closed, Rosa humming in the kitchen, Luca reading at the breakfast table. Actually reading, not reviewing intelligence, but the battered roomie she'd pulled from the shelf, which had migrated from the library to the kitchen table, and then to the study, and now to whatever room she was in, as if it were following her. She'd enrolled in the spring semester remotely. Her thesis committee had accepted her explanation of an unexpected extended research opportunity with the professional enthusiasm of academics, who smelled a genuinely novel angle. Her thesis had evolved into something she hadn't planned, a study of the space between public record and human complexity, of how institutions become people and people become institutions, of the gap between what crime fiction said about these worlds and what the reality contained. She had, she realized, been studying him all along, and somewhere in the studying had found something she hadn't been looking for. Danny had gone back to her apartment after 2 weeks, with NDAs she'd signed with the cheerful pragmatism of someone who had already decided they intended to marry a lawyer, and thus had professional resources for such situations. She and Arya video called every 3rd day. Danny's assessment of Luca Moretti was comprehensive and could be summarized as terrifying and clearly obsessed with you. Okay, I guess. One evening in late November, Arya was in the study working when Luca came in and closed the door. She looked up. He was holding something. A ring, she realized slowly. Not displayed, not presented, just held between 2 fingers with the same unself-conscious directness he brought to everything, including things that other people would have staged and rehearsed. "I'm going to say this plainly," he said, "because you deserve plain." She closed her laptop, turned to face him fully. "I found you asleep in my chair in the most secure room of my life," he said, "with my name in your hands. I watched you cut your way free of zip ties in a dark room while waiting for me to come find you. I watched you finish my sentences and outthink my enemies and read my brother in a 7-year-old's face in a photograph." He came to stand before her, not kneeling, she noted. This man did not kneel. He stood, because kneeling implied supplication and what he was doing was not suppliant. It was declarative. "I love you. I have loved you since I found you asleep. and I intend to love you for considerably longer than this empire will stand." He extended the ring, platinum, a single dark sapphire the color of storm gray eyes. "Marry me, or I'll kidnap you again." Arya Calloway stared at the ring, stared at Luca Moretti, thought about her crammed apartment and Dostoevsky the cat, and her bibliography formatting problems, and the 14-page thesis she'd been writing about this man. "I have conditions," she said. "Name them." The thesis gets finished and published. Under my name. Full research credit, his mouth curved. Academic publication of organized crime research is actually in my interest. Legitimizes the narrative. Of course you'd see it that way. She took a breath. Danny is never in danger because of me, already guaranteed. And I'm not furniture, she said. I'm not an accessory to your throne. I am a person with a career and a voice, and you will be the most inconvenient, overqualified, argumentative consigliera in the history of the Moretti family, he said, and the way he said it, with such complete, unconditional warmth, with no attempt to contain it, undid her entirely. I am counting on it. She reached out and took the ring. Put it on her own finger, because she wasn't going to let him do it without completing the metaphor. Yes, she said. He exhaled. She'd only heard him exhale like that once before, in a warehouse near Goose Island, when he'd pulled her against him and let the controlled horror of 6 hours finally release. The same sound. Different context. The same essential meaning, relief, which is love's other name. He pulled her in and kissed her, not the desperate, urgent claiming of the compound drive, but something slower, something that had the quality of permanence, of a decision fully made and fully meant. Marco knocked on the door. Dawn. The council is assembled. The Northern Territory Review. 5 minutes, Luca said, against Arya's hair. A pause from the other side of the door. I see the thesis writer has survived another evening without academic footnotes. Marco, Luca said. 5 minutes, Marco said, and she could hear him smiling. Outside, the first snow of the year had begun. Soft, covering the garden's architectural bones in white, muffling the city's noise to a distant, respectful murmur. Luca looked at it through the window, her hand in his thumb over the ring as if still verifying it was real. Blood oath, she said. You promised me Mafia tradition. He looked at her, surprised then, a genuine smile, rare and complete. He reached for the small knife that lived in his jacket pocket, the one she'd known was there for weeks, and chosen not to comment on. He made a small, precise cut on his palm, held it out. You don't have to, she took the knife, made her own cut, matched, pressed her palm to his. In this family, he said quietly, the formal words, the ones his grandfather had said and his father had said, and that she was the first woman to ever hear directed at her in earnest. There is no outside. There is no separate. There is only the bond and the blood and the choice. His eyes on hers. You choose this, I choose this, she said. The snow fell. The empire held. 8 months later. The Moretti wedding was not in a church. Luca had asked her once, early in the planning, because she'd assumed she'd have no opinions about this, and then found she had approximately 400, whether she wanted the traditional ceremony, the cathedral on Michigan Avenue, the reception for 300 where the city's shadow. Government attended in expensive suits and pretended they were there for the romance. She'd said no. He'd said good. They married in the garden, the same garden she'd looked out at from her captive window in October, whose architectural bones she'd watched under November snow and December frost, and the tentative green of early spring, and now, in June, in the particular golden light of a Chicago summer evening, were draped in white. Flowers whose names she'd learned from Rosa over the winter months. Jasmine and gardenia and something local she couldn't name that smelled of warm earth and possibility. 30 people. The ones who mattered, not the ones who needed to be impressed. Danny, magnificent in wine red, standing at Arya's side with her jaw set in the expression of someone who had decided to take the entire situation as a character arc. She had cried getting Arya into her dress, and then emphatically denied it. Marco, at Luca's side, in a suit that fit perfectly, and an expression that was professionally neutral except for the 15-second period during the vows when it became something else entirely. Rosa, in the back, who had cried openly and without apology from the beginning, and who had told Arya 6 months ago, very quietly, that she had not seen the Dawn truly happy since before Matteo, and that she intended to feed Arya properly until this happiness was adequately supported nutritionally. The efficient read words, real ones, not the public performance kind, words they had chosen together from the Rumi and from civil ceremony traditions, and from a piece of text that Arya had found in an Italian legal archive, a Sicilian marriage vow that Luca's grandfather had used that, translated roughly as, "Where you go, I follow. What threatens you, I face. What you build, I protect. What you love, I love." Luca repeated them in Italian first, then English, then, so quietly that only she heard, once more in Italian as a private thing. She said, "Yes." And yes again, and I'll keep saying it. He put the ring on her finger, the sapphire she'd already been wearing for 8 months, briefly removed for this moment, and returned with the formality the gesture deserved. She gave him the band she'd chosen, plain platinum, no crest. He'd raised an eyebrow. "You already know what you are," she'd said when she gave it to him. "You don't need to announce it." He'd looked at the plain band for a long moment, then at her, with that expression she'd learned to recognize, the one that had no name because it was too specific to him, too specifically hers, and put it on without another word. In June, in the garden, he put the band on with the same expression, and she thought, this is what ceremony is for the witnessing of the thing you already know. The reception was dinner and dancing and Rosa's food and Marco making a speech that was 3 minutes long and contained one joke that made Luca laugh. Genuinely, fully, the laugh she'd been collecting since October like something precious, and then contained something real and honest about loyalty and choice, and the difference between duty and love, and nobody at that table was unaffected. Later, after the guests had gone and the garden lights were low and warm, and the last jasmine-heavy breeze of the evening moved through the courtyard, Arya sat on the stone bench near the roses with her shoes off, and Luca beside her, his jacket gone, his sleeves rolled, her hand in his in the easy, permanent way. "My thesis was published," she said, 3 days ago. "Online first, print in the fall." "I know." He'd read it twice. She knew because she'd found it on his tablet with the annotations, that cramped, precise handwriting and its question marks present on every challenging page. The section on community investment and territorial sustainability got picked up by a criminology journal, she said. "They're calling it a new framework." "It is a new framework," he said. "You built it." She leaned her head against his shoulder, felt him shift to accommodate it, the automatic, unconsidered adjustment that meant you'd been fitting your body around another person long enough that it had become instinct. "I'm pregnant," she said. The garden held the words for a moment. Luca went very still, not the danger stillness, not the calculation stillness, the stillness of someone whose chest is too full for immediate movement. Then he turned and looked at her with an expression that was entirely uncontrolled for the first time in her memory, completely open, completely overwhelmed, completely his, and he said, very quietly, "Arya." "About 8 weeks," she said. "I found out 3 days ago. I've been trying to find the right moment to tell you, and then I thought," she gestured at the garden, the wedding lights still strung through the trees. This seemed like the right moment. He pulled her in with both arms, the way he had in a warehouse at 3 a.m. when she'd been the most afraid she'd ever been. The same fervent, encompassing hold. She felt him press his lips to her hair, felt the warmth of him, this dangerous, careful, grief-carrying, poetry-reading, empire-running man, shaking very slightly with something that wasn't fear. "A child," he said. "Yes, Dio mio," pressed into her hair. "Then, still holding on, I'll need to rearrange the security protocols for the East Wing entirely." She laughed. "Couldn't help it. And the garden will need Luca." She pulled back enough to look at him. "It's a baby. Not an invasion. Same preparation philosophy," he said. But his eyes were undone. completely and wonderfully undone. The library. The child will have access to the library from the beginning, obviously, and the language, Italian first, then English. Bilingual, yes, I've already thought about this. You've already thought. He stared at her. I found out 3 days ago, she reminded him patiently. I've had 3 days. A pause. Then, with the specific warmth that was only his, only hers, of course you have. In the trees at the edge of the garden, a bird sang the last of the evening songs. The city breathed its slow industrial breath beyond the fence. Somewhere in the house, Rosa was putting away the last of the wedding silver. Marco was driving the final guests to their cars with the quiet efficiency of a man who had decided tonight was a night for doing small things well. Luca Moretti held his wife in the garden of his compound and thought, for the first time in 11 years, since the phone call that had been Matteo, since the closing down that had followed, that the future was something he wanted to walk toward. Not march toward. Not strategize toward. Want. I found you asleep in my chair, he said quietly, into her hair. You found me, she agreed. I told you weren't going anywhere. You were right. She turned her face up. You're occasionally right. Frequently right, he said. Periodically, she allowed. He kissed her then. In the garden, in the June light, in the life they had built from a storm, and a locked door, and a thesis, and a photograph of a laughing boy, with the unhurried, absolute certainty of a man who has found the one thing in the world that has made him want to be more. Then what? Fear made him. The empire stood. The storm was long past. And in the amber-lit warmth of the Moretti compound, the Don and his brilliantly inconvenient, overqualified thesis-writing wife held onto each other in the dark and chose tomorrow, forever bound, forever his, forever hers.